They stole my land, cut off our water, and threatened to make my family homeless, all because I dared to question their authority. But buried in a forgotten legal document was their fatal mistake, a clause so powerful it could obliterate their corrupt empire overnight. This is how I turned an HOA's tyranny into their downfall. Have you ever faced power-hungry neighborhood dictators? Stick around. What happened next will make you cheer for justice. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across our front yard as my wife Abigail and I returned from a weekend getaway celebrating our 5th anniversary. We'd spent 3 blissful days in the mountains, disconnected from emails, phones, and the everyday stresses of life. Little did we know that while we were away, the battle that would consume the next several months of our lives had already begun. I remember pulling into our driveway, both of us still laughing about a joke from our trip, when Abigail suddenly grabbed my arm. "Lucas, what is that?" she asked, pointing toward our backyard. Where there had once been an open view to the quarter-acre plot behind our home, land that was explicitly included in our property deed, now stood a 6-foot concrete wall, gray and imposing, cutting us off completely from land we legally owned. I parked the car and we both rushed to investigate, stunned into disbelieving silence. The wall ran precisely along what someone had decided was the boundary of our property, though according to our deed, our land extended another 75 feet beyond it. Attached to the concrete was a small official-looking notice bearing the logo of Pinehaven Estates Homeowners Association. The message was concise and threatening: ecological conservation area, no trespassing. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. We purchased this home just 8 months ago, largely because of the spacious backyard where Abigail planned to create a garden for our daughter to learn about growing her own food. Now, without warning or discussion, that dream had been literally walled off. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Abigail said, her voice tight with anxiety. "They can't just build a wall on our property without telling us." I nodded, though a sinking feeling was already settling over me. During the buying process, our realtor had mentioned that the Pinehaven HO was active and particular, but assured us it was nothing to worry about. Now, I was beginning to understand what those carefully chosen words might have been hiding. I immediately went inside to retrieve our property documents, spreading them across the kitchen counter and confirming what I already knew. The land beyond the wall was unquestionably ours. The property lines were clearly marked, and nowhere in the HOA guidelines we'd received was there any mention of an ecological conservation area on or near our property. First thing Monday morning, I called the HOA office, determined to get answers. Instead of a solution, I reached Diane Franklin, the association's secretary, who informed me in a clipped tone that all inquiries regarding property boundaries will be addressed at next month's HOA meeting. When I explained that a concrete wall had appeared on my property without notice, she simply repeated her statement and added that I should consult the updated ecological preservation bylaws, documents I had never received. Frustrated, I sent a formal email to the HOA board, attaching copies of our deed and property survey, and demanded the immediate removal of the wall. The response was an automated message thanking me for my community input. With no immediate help from official channels, I decided to speak with my neighbors. Isabella Ramirez, whose property adjoined ours on the east side, greeted me with a sympathetic look that told me she'd seen the wall. "Let me guess, the conservation area suddenly includes part of your land?" she asked, inviting me onto her porch. Over iced tea, Isabella explained that I had unknowingly stepped into a long-running power struggle in Pinehaven Estates. "Constance Blackwell has been running this place like her personal kingdom for 15 years, she explained. "She rarely appears in person, but her enforcers, especially Philip Hawthorne, do her dirty work." Isabella described how the HOA under Constance's leadership had a history of gradually encroaching on residents' property rights, always cloaked in official-sounding regulations that seemed to materialize overnight. That evening, as Abigail and I were discussing our options, a sharp knock at the door announced the arrival of Philip Hawthorne himself. Standing on our doorstep with Diane Franklin and two other HOA board members, Philip's thin smile did nothing to mask the confrontational nature of their visit. Mr. Bennett, he began without pleasantries. I understand you have questions about the ecological conservation barrier. I'm here to inform you that under the new Environmental Habitat Preservation Ordinance, the area behind your home has been designated critical habitat and is not available for private use. When I produced our property deed showing clear ownership, Philip's smile turned into a smirk. HOA regulations can supersede any property claim within this community, he said dismissively. You should have read the fine print when you purchased Mr. Bennett. Our HOA has special privileges. I asked to speak directly with Constance Blackwell, but Philip quickly shut that down. Mrs. Blackwell doesn't handle direct complaints, he said with finality. As the group turned to leave, Philip paused and turned back. And if you're considering removing the barrier, the fine is $500 per day, plus placement on the HOA watch list. Just a friendly piece of advice. The threat hung in the air as they walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, clutching our property deed in one hand and feeling for the first time like my home was no longer truly mine. After the confrontation with Philip, I knew we needed to approach this strategically rather than emotionally. The next morning, Abigail and I sat at our kitchen table mapping out a plan. We should talk to more neighbors, she suggested, her voice breaking as she squeezed my hand. Our daughter's nursery looks onto that wall. We can't let them steal her future. I agreed, but couldn't ignore the practical concerns. We just bought this house, I pointed out. If this turns into a legal battle with the HOA, we might not have the resources to fight it. Abigail reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes showing steely resolve where just hours ago there had been tears. Let's gather information first, then decide our next steps. Her calm determination steadied me, reminding me why I'd fallen in love with this former student activist who'd become an elementary school teacher without losing her passion for justice. Our investigation led us to Walter Thompson, a retired attorney in his late 60s who lived at the end of our street. Unlike many residents who seemed hesitant to discuss the HOA openly, Walter invited us in without reservation. So, they've claimed your backyard as ecological conservation, have they? He asked, shaking his head. That's a new one, even for them. Over the next hour, Walter provided a history lesson on Pine Haven Estates that no realtor would ever share. He explained that Constance Blackwell rarely intervened directly in disputes, preferring to maintain a veneer of respectability, while Philip and Diane implemented her agenda. Constance operates like a chess player, Walter explained. She's always 3 moves ahead, and she knows exactly which rules to bend without technically breaking them. Walter suggested we speak with Franklin Roberts, one of the original developers of Pine Haven Estates, who might have insights into the property arrangements before Constance's reign began. Roberts is in his 70s now, living at Sunnyvale Assisted Living on the north side of town, Walter told us. If anyone knows the original intent behind property lines here, it's him. Before we left, Walter offered one more piece of advice. Be careful about who you trust in Pine Haven. Constance has cultivated informants throughout the neighborhood. Not everyone who smiles at you is on your side. That afternoon, we visited Franklin Roberts, finding him alert and engaged despite his advanced age. When we mentioned the sudden appearance of an ecological conservation area in our backyard, his bushy eyebrows shot up in surprise. Conservation area? There's no such designation in the original plans, he stated firmly. Roberts explained that he and his partners had designed Pine Haven Estates with generous lot sizes specifically to attract families who wanted space for gardens and outdoor activities. Every backyard in your section was individually plotted and included in the property deeds, he confirmed, validating what our own documents showed. As our conversation continued, Roberts mentioned something that caught my attention, a homeowner protection clause that had been included in the original deed covenant. Though he couldn't recall the specific details, he suggested it had been designed to prevent exactly the kind of HOA overreach we were experiencing. As I opened the county records file, my hands trembled. The document's final page contained two words that would change everything and make Constance Blackwell wish she'd never heard my name. When I returned home that evening, my mind was racing with this new information. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed something taped to our front door. An official HOA violation notice asserting three separate infractions: excessive lawn height, unapproved front door paint color, and nonconforming landscape arrangement. The fine totaled $750 due within 14 days. I was dumbfounded. We had mowed the lawn just before our weekend trip. The door was the exact same color as when we purchased the home, and we hadn't changed the landscaping at all. This was clearly retaliation for questioning the wall, and it made my blood boil. Inside, I found Abigail in a state of agitation. Someone was photographing our house, she said, describing how she'd spotted a man across the street taking pictures with a telephoto lens. When she'd confronted him, he claimed to be an inspector from the County Ecological Conservation Committee, but refused to show identification when pressed. "I don't think that's even a real government body," Abigail said, her teacher's instinct for spotting deception on high alert. I immediately took photos of our perfectly reasonable lawn, door, and landscaping as evidence, then drafted a formal email contesting the violations and requesting a meeting with Constance Blackwell herself. Something told me we were being systematically harassed, and I wanted to confront the person truly responsible. I had just hit send when my phone rang. It was Isabella calling to warn us that she'd received notice of an emergency HOA meeting to discuss serious violations at the Bennett residence. The meeting was scheduled for the next evening, giving us almost no time to prepare. I thanked her for the heads up and was about to hang up when Abigail's phone began ringing. It was her school principal expressing concerns about complaints from influential community members regarding Abigail's teaching methods. The implication was clear. The HOA was extending its reach into our professional lives, trying to isolate and pressure us from multiple angles. Just as we were processing this escalation, my phone buzzed with a text from Abigail, who had stepped onto our front porch. "Get out here now. Philip and the HOA maintenance crew are measuring our front yard." When I asked what they're doing, they said verifying public sidewalk extension boundaries. "Lucas, I think they're planning to take our front yard, too." I rushed outside to confront this new invasion, feeling for the first time that we weren't just fighting for our property. We were fighting for our very sense of safety and belonging in what was supposed to be our home. The wall was just their opening move. By moonrise, they'd escalate to psychological warfare, starting with a photo that shouldn't exist. I raced outside to find Philip and three workers in Pine Haven Estates maintenance uniforms marking off a substantial portion of our front yard with white spray paint. The marked area extended nearly 15 feet from the sidewalk into what was unquestionably our property, encompassing almost half of our front yard. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, struggling to keep my voice level. Philip straightened up, clipboard in hand, and regarded me with clinical detachment. "We're marking the public easement for the community sidewalk extension project," he stated, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. "This portion of your front yard falls within the updated community planning guidelines." Abigail, in a rare display of anger, stepped forward with her phone held high, recording the entire interaction. "Show me the legal order that gives you permission to mark our property," she demanded, her voice firm but controlled, the same tone she likely used with misbehaving students. "You can't just decide to take our front yard without any notice or consent." Philip's composure cracked slightly as he glanced at the camera. "I suggest you stop harassing HOA personnel during official business, Mrs. Bennett," he said, his voice taking on a threatening edge. "I'd hate to have to call the police about this interference." Abigail didn't flinch. "Please do," she replied. "I'd love to explain to them how you're trespassing and attempting to seize private property without legal authority." The confrontation ended with Philip and his crew retreating, but the spray-painted marks remained as a visual threat of what might be coming next. We were now fighting a two-front battle, trying to reclaim our backyard while also protecting our front yard from seizure. That afternoon, we drove to the county records office, determined to find documentation that might help us understand and potentially fight what was happening. The records office was a mundane government building with fluorescent lighting and the faint smell of old paper. We were greeted by Andrew Sullivan, a helpful clerk who seemed genuinely interested in our situation. "You're not the first Pine Haven resident to come digging through these records," he mentioned casually as he helped us locate the original development plans. "A representative from the HOA's law firm was in here a few weeks ago looking through the same files." This revelation was concerning. It suggested the HOA was actively researching the same documents we were seeking, perhaps looking for loopholes or attempting to hide information. With Andrew's assistance, we located the original 1988 deed covenant for Pine Haven Estates, including a special appendix that wasn't referenced in any of the modern copies we'd received during our home purchase. Buried within the legal jargon was Clause 23B, a homeowner protection provision explicitly designed to prevent HOA overreach. The clause stated that if the HOA took actions that encroached on private property without proper notice and majority homeowner approval, property owners could trigger a special provision that would immediately suspend the HOA's regulatory authority pending a formal hearing. This legal weapon could dismantle their empire if we survived long enough to use it, because that night, the real harassment began. During our search, we also uncovered a set of documents detailing an old dispute between the HOA and the city over water rights control, information that temporarily diverted our attention. Andrew mentioned a previous lawsuit between a resident and the HOA regarding a conservation area, but further investigation revealed this was a different case in a similar development across town. These false leads nearly caused us to overlook the significance of Clause 23B. Fortunately, we realized its importance before leaving. The original legal memorandum explaining the clause's purpose confirmed it was specifically designed as a check against HOA power abuse and couldn't be invalidated by any subsequent rule changes, a crucial detail that would prove vital later. As we were photographing these documents, I received an alarming text from Isabella. Diane was distributing notices throughout the neighborhood about an emergency meeting to discuss serious HOA covenant violations at our address. Simultaneously, Abigail got another call from her school principal expressing concern about mounting complaints. We were clearly being targeted from multiple angles in an attempt to pressure us into submission. Even more disturbing, as we were leaving the records office, Abigail noticed someone photographing us from a parked car across the street. The feeling of being watched and targeted was becoming increasingly unsettling. With the documents secured, I contacted Rebecca Winters, a college friend who had become a real estate attorney. I sent her everything we'd gathered and arranged to meet the following day. Her initial assessment was encouraging. Clause 23B could be a legal nuclear option against HOA overreach, she explained over the phone. But we need to document clear violations and follow the triggering procedure exactly. Rebecca advised us to continue gathering evidence of the HOA's actions while she researched the specific legal requirements for activating the clause. Her confident tone gave me the first glimmer of hope I'd felt since discovering the wall. That hope was short-lived. When we arrived home, we discovered our water had been shut off, and a notice was attached to our door from the Department of Environmental Habitat Control, an agency that, as far we could determine, didn't actually exist. The notice declared our home was in violation of regulations regarding ecological conservation area encroachment and ordered immediate compliance with HOA directives. A quick call to the City Utilities Department confirmed our suspicion. The water shutoff had been requested by the HOA, citing serious covenant violations. The representative seemed confused by the situation, but explained they typically honored HOA requests. As if the water shutoff wasn't enough, we found a crowd gathering on our street. Philip stood in the center, addressing about 20 of our neighbors. These are the people who are undermining our community's environmental values and property standards, he announced as we approached. The HOA has called an emergency meeting tonight to discuss appropriate penalties for these ongoing violations. Looking at the faces and crowd, I saw a mix of expressions. Some appeared concerned or sympathetic, while others seemed judgmental and angry. In that moment, standing before my neighbors being publicly accused like a criminal, I realized this conflict had escalated far beyond a simple property dispute. We were fighting for our reputation, our belonging, and our very right to be part of this community. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was held in the Pinehaven Community Center, a modest building with harsh fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable folding chairs. The room was packed. Nearly 60 residents had turned out, far more than the typical attendees, according to Walter, who sat beside us offering moral support. At the front of the room, behind a long table covered with crisp blue cloth, sat Philip, Diane, and 3 other HOA board members. Conspicuously absent was Constance Blackwell, who Philip explained was away on HOA business. A convenient explanation that prevented us from confronting the person truly behind these actions. I had come prepared, bringing copies of our deed, photographs of the wall and spray-painted markers on our lawn, and a small digital recorder to document the proceedings. Abigail sat beside me, outwardly calm but watchful, scanning the room to gauge which residents might be sympathetic to our situation. Philip opened the meeting with a theatrical sigh, as if deeply troubled by the proceedings. It is with great disappointment that we gather tonight to address the numerous violations committed by the Bennetts since their arrival in our community, he began, gesturing toward a PowerPoint presentation titled, Covenant Violations and Community Impact. What followed was a breathtaking display of distortion and falsehood, accusations that we had deliberately violated landscaping standards, attempted unauthorized construction, and obstructed ecological preservation efforts. The presentation included selectively cropped photographs of our property and misleading comparisons to HOA standards. When Philip reached his conclusion, a proposal for a $10,000 fine and the right to claim our front yard as community property if not paid within 72 hours, audible gasps came from several attendees. He cited an obscure procedural rule that none of us had ever heard of, claiming it gave the HOA authority to seize property under certain conditions. These measures may seem harsh, Philip acknowledged with false regret, but they are necessary to maintain the standards and property values that make Pinehaven special. When the floor opened for discussion, I raised my hand immediately. I'd like to see the specific regulations that you claim we violated, I requested calmly, along with the minutes from HOA meetings where these rules were approved. Philip's smile tightened as he shuffled through some papers. Internal protocols don't require us to share procedural documentation at this stage, he responded dismissively. I was prepared for this evasion. Standing up, I read aloud from the state law regarding homeowners associations. All HOA regulations must be properly documented, approved by appropriate majority vote, and made accessible to all community members upon request. A murmur rippled through the audience. Furthermore, I continued, I'm requesting a formal vote on any proposed fines or property actions as required by Article 4 of the Pinehaven HOA Charter. This clearly caught Philip off guard. He hadn't expected me to be familiar with the Charter's requirements. Several residents began asking questions, expressing concern about the procedural irregularities. I noticed one board member in particular, Gloria Masters, watching the proceedings with increasing discomfort. When she asked Philip to clarify when the ecological conservation area had been officially designated, he stumbled through a vague answer about executive board decisions in the interest of community welfare. Sensing the meeting slipping out of his control, Philip abruptly declared that the executive board would deliberate on the appropriate measures without a community vote. As residents began protesting this clear violation of procedure, Abigail stood up, her patience finally exhausted. Do all of you realize they've cut off our water and sent fake government notices? She asked the room, her voice carrying the moral authority she developed through years of teaching. They're using intimidation and deception against us simply for questioning their authority over land that legally belongs to us. Diane quickly attempted to deny these accusations, but Abigail had come prepared, passing copies of the fraudulent notice to nearby residents. This isn't a government agency, she pointed out. There is no Department of Environmental Habitat Control in our county. This is harassment and a potential civil rights violation. The meeting dissolved into chaos, with various residents taking sides, some expressing outrage at the HOA's tactics, others insisting that rules must be followed, regardless of how they were implemented. As people began filing out, I distributed flyers inviting everyone to a Pine Haven community fair that weekend to be held in Isabella's backyard. The event was carefully framed as a social gathering rather than a political meeting, allowing us to circumvent the HOA's restrictions on unauthorized assemblies. It would provide an opportunity to share information about Clause 23B without appearing to directly challenge the HOA's authority. In the parking lot afterward, Philip cornered me between cars, his friendly facade completely gone. I don't know what you think you're doing, he hissed, but Constance has friends in the courts, police department, and every important office in this town. You can't win this. Before I could respond, he walked away, leaving me with a final warning. Sometimes people who make trouble in Pine Haven find it's better to just sell and move on. Property values can tank overnight with the right assessments. Returning to my car, I found an HOA violation notice on my windshield claiming improper parking zone usage, despite being in a clearly marked visitor space. And when we arrived home, we were surprised to find a city building inspector examining our house. Approaching cautiously, I asked to see his identification and paperwork. The inspector, introducing himself as Lieutenant James Hoffman, explained he was responding to an anonymous complaint about unauthorized construction. After a brief inspection, he found no violations and seemed genuinely perplexed by the situation. As he was leaving, Lieutenant Hoffman hesitated, then lowered his voice. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but 2 weeks ago, I refused a request from Mrs. Blackwell to arrest a resident for trespassing on HOA property. There was no legal basis for it, but my supervisor got a call from Commissioner Pierce asking us to reconsider. He glanced around nervously. Just be careful, okay? There are some strange politics that play in Pine Haven. As the inspector drove away, Abigail and I stood on our doorstep, the reality of our situation sinking in. We weren't just fighting an overzealous HOA. We were facing a coordinated campaign of harassment backed by influential local figures. The realization was both frightening and clarifying. They wouldn't be working this hard if they weren't afraid of something, Abigail observed thoughtfully. Let's find out what that is. With newfound determination, we began planning our next move, understanding now that this fight would require not just legal knowledge, but strategic thinking and community organizing. The battle for our home, and perhaps for the soul of Pine Haven itself, was just beginning. The Pine Haven Community Fair on Saturday afternoon transformed Isabella's spacious backyard into a hub of neighborhood activity. We had carefully designed the event to appear purely social, lawn games for children, a potluck table overflowing with homemade dishes, and casual seating areas that naturally encouraged conversation. This approach let us gather residents without violating the HOA's ban on political assemblies, while creating opportunities to quietly share information about Clause 23B. Isabella had outdone herself with decorations and logistics, motivated by her own history of HOA harassment after attempting to install solar panels 2 years prior. Rebecca arrived early, setting up a discreet, free homeowner advice table where she could review documents and answer questions without explicitly challenging the HOA. Walter brought historical photos of Pine Haven, which served both as an interesting display and a way to introduce conversations about the original development intentions. The atmosphere was relaxed and neighborly, exactly the opposite of the tense, confrontational environment Philip had created at the emergency meeting. Children played while adults mingled, creating a sense of community that had been notably absent in Pine Haven for years. This is what neighborhoods are supposed to feel like, one elderly resident commented, accepting a glass of lemonade from Abigail. To our surprise, Diane Franklin appeared mid-afternoon, initially hovering at the perimeter with obvious discomfort. Her intention to spy was transparent, but as the afternoon progressed, something unexpected happened. As neighbors engaged in conversations, sharing their own HOA frustration stories, Diane's expression gradually shifted from suspicious to conflicted. I overheard one resident describing how her request for a wheelchair ramp had been delayed for months due to aesthetic considerations, forcing her elderly mother to remain housebound. Diane seemed genuinely troubled by this account, suggesting the HOA's human impact might not have been fully visible even to its own officers. During a quiet moment, Gloria Masters approached me, ostensibly discussing a community garden proposal, but actually conveying something more urgent. "I've been on the board for 3 years," she whispered, "and I've been questioning certain financial decisions for months. The numbers don't add up." She explained that as a former accountant, she had noticed irregularities in the HOA's financial reporting. There are expenditures labeled as community improvements with no corresponding projects and consulting fees to companies I can't verify exist. Gloria had been quietly collecting documentation, but feared retaliation if she raised concerns publicly. "Constance controls the board completely," she confided. "Anyone who questions her decisions suddenly finds themselves facing personal emergencies that require their resignation." This new information dovetailed with another discovery Walter had made. According to state law, HOAs were required to provide annual financial reports to all members, something Pine Haven had never done during Constance's tenure. As the fair continued, we gathered more accounts of suspicious HOA actions, selective enforcement of rules, mysterious special assessments, and properties purchased by the HOA under questionable circumstances. By day's end, we had connected with nearly 30 homeowners who expressed interest in supporting an investigation into the HOA's practices. The community fabric, which Constance had methodically frayed through divide and conquer tactics, was beginning to mend. Working with Rebecca, I drafted a formal legal letter to the HOA board demanding immediate removal of the wall on our property, cancellation of all baseless fines, restoration of our water service, cessation of all front yard encroachment activities, and production of the past 5 years' financial records as required by state law. The letter explicitly cited Clause 23B and warned that failure to comply within 72 hours would trigger the clause's emergency provisions, potentially suspending the board's authority pending investigation. Rebecca filed copies with the county records office to establish an official timeline while we delivered the original to the HOA office and copies to each board member's home. The response came swiftly and aggressively. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from the HOA's legal counsel claiming Clause 23B was no longer applicable under modernized governance standards and threatening to sue me personally for harassment and defamation of the association's officers. Almost simultaneously, Philip appeared with a construction crew and began erecting a temporary fence around the portion of our front yard they had previously marked, declaring it an emergency measure to protect community safety. Abigail, her patience completely exhausted, confronted Philip directly, recording the entire interaction on her phone and demanding to see permits for the construction. When he failed to produce any official documentation, she called the city building department to report unauthorized construction, forcing the crew to halt their work pending proper permits. The community's atmosphere was noticeably shifting. Neighbors who had previously remained silent began sharing their HOA experiences on community forums and social media platforms. Several residents openly questioned the board's actions at local businesses and social gatherings. The wall of fear Constance had carefully constructed over years was developing significant cracks. Even local media took notice, with a reporter from the town newspaper contacting us about unusual enforcement patterns in Pine Haven Estates. In the midst of this momentum, we received an unexpected visitor. For the first time since our ordeal began, Constance Blackwell herself appeared at our door one evening. Unlike the confrontational Philip or the nervous Diane, Constance was the epitome of poise and sophistication, perfectly composed and radiating the confident charm of someone accustomed to getting her way. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, she began with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I believe there's been a series of unfortunate misunderstandings that we should resolve directly. She proposed a compromise. The HOA would remove the front yard fencing if we would relinquish our claim to the backyard property and sign an agreement not to disclose clause 23B to other residents. Her offer was surprisingly tempting. We could reclaim our front yard and end the harassment immediately. The backyard, while legally ours, had already been walled off, and fighting indefinitely seemed exhausting. Constance was masterful in her presentation, making the compromise sound reasonable and even generous. For a moment, I found myself seriously considering it. Abigail, however, immediately recognized the classic good cop strategy at play. We'll need time to consider your proposal, she told Constance smoothly. After Constance departed with a promise to reconsider more stringent measures if we declined her offer, Abigail turned to me. They're desperate, she observed. They wouldn't offer a compromise unless we're closer to discovering something important than we realize. That something important came into focus later that evening when I received a call from Lily Franklin, Diane's daughter and a young prosecutor with the district attorney's office. She requested an urgent, confidential meeting at a coffee shop 2 towns over. My mother doesn't know I'm contacting you, Lily explained when we met, but I can't stand by anymore. She revealed that Constance was rushing to finalize a major real estate deal with a developer called Westlake Properties, and our backyard was the final piece they needed. They've been quietly assembling land parcels around Pine Haven for 3 years, Lily explained. Without your property, their $4.5 million deal falls through next month. As I was processing this revelation, my phone buzzed with an urgent text from Gloria. Found evidence. Need to meet now. Following her directions to a secluded spot in the city park, I arrived to find Gloria's car abandoned, driver's door ajar, and her laptop still running on the passenger seat. On the screen, financial documents from the HOA were being copied to an external drive. My heart pounding, I called the police, then carefully examined the laptop's contents while waiting. What I found was staggering, evidence that Constance, Philip, and Diane had embezzled over $300,000 in HOA fees through a fake consulting company while secretly purchasing small land parcels around Pine Haven under a shell corporation. All part of a scheme to assemble and sell a large combined property to Westlake at an enormous profit. Lieutenant James Hoffman arrived at the park within minutes of my call, taking the situation seriously after our previous interaction. He secured Gloria's vehicle and laptop as potential evidence, noting the suspicious circumstances. This goes beyond HOA disputes, he observed grimly. Abandoning a vehicle with the door open suggests possible duress. He took detailed notes about Gloria's recent activities and her role on the HOA board. While Hoffman was careful not to jump to conclusions, his concern was evident when he revealed Gloria had contacted him several days earlier to express fears about her safety and had forwarded copies of certain documents for safekeeping. I didn't fully understand their significance at the time, he admitted, but I'm beginning to connect some dots. The laptop contained damning evidence. Over the past 5 years, Constance and her inner circle had systematically diverted HOA funds through a consulting company called Pinehaven Community Solutions, a shell corporation that traced back to Philip's home address. More disturbingly, they had used these misappropriated funds to secretly purchase small land parcels surrounding the community under another entity named Evergreen Holdings. These parcels, individually unremarkable, formed a valuable assembled property when combined with certain homeowner lots, including our backyard. Documentation showed they were in final negotiations with Westlake Properties for a $4.5 million sale, contingent on delivering the complete package within 30 days. Our property was quite literally the missing piece preventing them from closing the deal. Rebecca and I spent hours analyzing these documents, discovering Constance had forged signatures on numerous HOA documents and meeting minutes to authorize her actions without actual board approval. She had created a paper trail of seemingly legitimate decisions that in reality had never been properly voted on. This goes beyond HOA overreach, Rebecca concluded. We're looking at fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and potentially conspiracy. These are criminal matters. With this evidence, our strategy shifted from merely defending our property to exposing a years-long criminal enterprise that had victimized the entire community. Lieutenant Hoffman confirmed Gloria was safe. She had gone into hiding at Lily's home after being followed by individuals she believed were connected to Constance. This revelation highlighted the seriousness of our situation. If Gloria, a board member, felt physically threatened, what might they do to us? Abigail organized a neighborhood search party as cover, allowing residents to gather while sharing information about Gloria's disappearance and the troubling circumstances surrounding it. This approach cleverly circumvented the HOA's restrictions while building community awareness and concern. Constance, sensing her scheme unraveling, called an unannounced emergency board meeting where she pushed through a bylaw change requiring 90% homeowner signatures to remove board leadership, an essentially impossible threshold. When news of this meeting leaked, community outrage intensified. Meanwhile, Diane, increasingly consumed by guilt and fear, secretly contacted me to confirm Gloria was safe and reveal that Constance had hired a private security firm to monitor my activities and those of my supporters. She has recordings of conversations with city officials, Diane confessed nervously. She uses them for leverage when needed. As pressure mounted, Constance launched a disinformation campaign, spreading rumors that I was working with outside developers to transform Pinehaven into a commercial complex. Simultaneously, the HOA announced a 200% increase in membership fees, citing unexpected legal expenses and community security upgrades. These desperate measures only fueled resident skepticism and solidified support for our cause. The neighborhood was awakening to the manipulation that had controlled them for years. With Walter's guidance, we organized a public meeting at the Central Park, technically outside HOA jurisdiction, and invited all residents along with Lieutenant Hoffman, Lily, and a reporter from the local newspaper. We carefully structured the gathering as an informational community session rather than an explicit HOA challenge. The turnout exceeded our expectations, with nearly 200 residents attending despite short notice. I presented our findings methodically, sharing evidence of financial improprieties and the secret land acquisition scheme without making accusations we couldn't definitively prove. What Constance never understood: bullies always overplay their hand, and we had receipts. The meeting's dynamic shifted dramatically when Gloria made a surprise appearance, accompanied by Edmund Pierce, the city commissioner who had previously supported Constance. Gloria explained that after discovering financial irregularities, she had approached Pierce with evidence, convincing him to examine the documents independently. What I found was disturbing enough to warrant a complete reevaluation of my relationship with Mrs. Blackwell, Pierce announced to the gathered residents. The city will be opening a formal investigation into these matters immediately. This endorsement from a respected official lent crucial credibility to our claims. Then came the most unexpected moment of the evening. Diane Franklin stood up from the crowd and walked to the front, visibly trembling but determined. "I can't do this anymore," she announced, her voice breaking. "For years, I've participated in actions I knew were wrong because Constance convinced me they were necessary for community welfare. She threatened and manipulated all of us." Diane described how Constance maintained control through a combination of intimidation, selective enforcement, and secret recordings of private conversations with officials. "She has files on everyone with influence in this town," Diane revealed. "If you oppose her, something from your past suddenly becomes a public issue." I announced the results of our Clause 23B petition. 76% of residents had signed, far exceeding the 50% threshold required by the original covenant. Edmund Pierce confirmed the City Council had opened a formal investigation into the HOA's financial activities and potential abuse of authority. The community's mood was palpable, a mixture of shock, anger, and relief that long-suspected problems were finally being addressed. Just as momentum seemed firmly in our favor, Philip arrived with the HOA's legal representative, interrupting the proceedings with loud objections. "This meeting and petition are invalid under revised HOA regulations," the attorney announced, brandishing the recently changed bylaws. Rebecca countered by presenting the original legal memorandum Andrew had discovered, confirming Clause 23B was specifically designed to prevent HOA abuse and couldn't be invalidated by subsequent rule changes. "This protection was intentionally placed beyond the board's reach," she explained to the crowd. "The original developers anticipated exactly this kind of situation." As the confrontation intensified, Constance herself appeared, maintaining remarkable composure despite the circumstances. "There seems to be a significant misunderstanding about the board's intentions," she stated smoothly. "Everything we've done has been in the community's best interest." Her confident demeanor suggested she still believed she could control the narrative. That confidence evaporated when I played a recording of her conversation with the Westlake Properties representative, where she explicitly acknowledged the plan to acquire our land under false pretenses and mislead the community about development intentions. The recording had been provided by Gloria, who had begun documenting meetings after noticing financial discrepancies. We watched her carefully constructed facade crumble before the entire community. Constance's elegant composure finally shattered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed, abandoning pretense. "Tomorrow, all of you will receive home foreclosure notices for serious HOA, covenant violations, and accumulated penalties. We'll see how brave your little revolution is when you're facing eviction." True to her threat, the next morning found official-looking foreclosure notices on the doors of 13 homes, including ours. Each document claimed the homeowner owed tens of thousands of dollars in accumulated violation penalties and demanded payment within 72 hours to avoid eviction proceedings. The notices bore the HOA's letterhead and Constance's signature, but as Rebecca immediately pointed out, they violated numerous state laws regarding property seizure. "This isn't just improper, it's illegal," she explained as we gathered in our living room with several other targeted residents. "HOAs cannot foreclose without court proceedings, which require documented violations, proper notification periods, and judicial review. These notices are essentially fraudulent." Moving quickly, Rebecca helped us draft an official notice of activation of Clause 23B, a formal legal document based on our petition results and the discovered memorandum. We filed this notice with the county records office, the district attorney, and delivered copies to each HOA board member. The document immediately suspended all powers of the current HOA leadership pending a formal hearing, effectively stripping Constance and her allies of their authority. "They can still claim power," Rebecca warned, "but legally, any actions they take from this point forward could constitute additional violations." Despite the legal notification, Constance proceeded with her foreclosure plan, appearing at our homes that afternoon accompanied by Philip, Diane, and a man identifying himself as a property recovery representative. They were met by an unexpected sight, our front yard filled with supporters. Dozens of Pine Haven residents standing in solidarity, alongside reporters from two local news outlets, Lieutenant Hoffman and Lily Franklin representing the district attorney's office. County sheriff's deputies, summoned by Lieutenant Hoffman to ensure peace, stood nearby observing the proceedings. Constance faltered momentarily at this show of opposition, but quickly recovered her composure. "This changes nothing," she announced, directing her property representative to post the foreclosure notice. I stepped forward and publicly read our notice of activation, declaring the HOA leadership suspended under Clause 23B's emergency provisions. Any attempt to enforce HOA rules or collect fees at this point is not legally binding, I explained to the gathered crowd. The clause specifically provides for this community protection mechanism. Lieutenant Hoffman intervened when Constance attempted to proceed anyway. "Ma'am, I need to advise you that continuing could potentially constitute attempted illegal foreclosure," he stated officially. "The county sheriff's office has been notified of the activated clause and its legal implications." For perhaps the first time, uncertainty flickered across Constance's perfectly composed features. Her world of absolute control was crumbling around her. Lily Franklin, stepping forward in her capacity as Assistant District Attorney, delivered the final blow. "Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Franklin, I'm officially informing you that the District Attorney's Office has opened an investigation into financial improprieties within the Pine Haven HOA, including allegations of embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of community funds." The formal, public nature of this announcement left no room for Constance to maneuver or intimidate her way out of the situation. Diane, unable to bear the pressure any longer, broke down completely. "It's all true," she sobbed, shocking everyone, including Constance and Philip. "We falsified documents, diverted funds, everything." Constance said it was for community improvement, but it was all for the land deal. As Diane continued her public confession, detailing years of manipulation and deception, Constance maintained a frozen smile while frantically trying to silence her longtime accomplice. "Diane is clearly experiencing a mental health episode," Constance declared loudly, attempting to discredit the confession. "She's been under tremendous stress lately, and these delusions." Her damage control efforts were interrupted by Gloria stepping forward from the crowd, holding up a USB drive. "I have video recordings from 5 private meetings where you discussed all of this, Constance," she announced calmly. "I've been secretly documenting everything since I first discovered discrepancies in the maintenance fund accounting." This final revelation proved too much for Constance's carefully maintained facade. "You ungrateful traitor," she screamed at Gloria, her sophisticated veneer completely shattered. "After everything I've done for this community, I built Pine Haven into what it is. Without me, you'd all be living in a worthless subdivision." In her rage, she inadvertently confirmed her knowledge of the illegal activities, ranting about how necessary her methods had been and how ungrateful the residents were for her vision. As the sheriff's deputies moved toward her, Constance attempted to flee to her car, but tripped on the lawn, sprawling inelegantly before the community she had tyrannized for years, a final humiliation witnessed by everyone present. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. Constance, Philip, and Diane, with lesser charges due to her cooperation, were indicted for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The county court issued a temporary restraining order officially suspending all HOA operations pending a complete investigation and resident vote. The concrete wall behind our home was removed, restoring our full property rights, and our water service was immediately reinstated. A provisional HOA board was democratically elected, with Walter serving as interim chairman, committed to transparency and resident input. Gloria was appointed as the new treasurer with a special mandate to audit all HOA finances and establish proper accounting practices throughout the community. Palpable sense of liberation spread as residents began communicating openly without fear of selective enforcement or retaliation. The local newspaper covered the story extensively, publishing a series of articles titled Behind the Picket Fence: How a Forgotten Clause Toppled a Neighborhood Tyrant. 6 months later, the community gathered for the dedication of the Franklin Roberts Memorial Park at Pine Haven Center. Roberts himself, now 71, was guest of honor, cutting the ribbon and receiving recognition for his foresight in creating the protective clause that ultimately saved the community. I always believed neighborhoods should be governed by consensus, not control, he told the assembled residents. Clause 23B was our insurance policy against exactly the kind of overreach we witnessed. Abigail and I finally completed the backyard garden we had dreamed of, creating a space where neighborhood children came on weekends to learn about growing their own food. Walter established a monthly homeowners' rights workshop, helping residents understand their legal protections. The community began healing, with former adversaries finding common ground and rebuilding a truly collaborative neighborhood. In an unexpected epilogue, Constance's 80-year-old mother contacted me, apologizing for her daughter's behavior and revealing that Constance had spent her life trying to prove herself after suffering emotional abuse from her stepfather throughout childhood. It doesn't excuse what she did, the elegant elderly woman explained, but perhaps it helps explain the desperate need for control that drove her. This glimpse of humanity behind the villain offered a poignant reminder that even in conflicts with clear moral boundaries, understanding the full human story matters. Standing in our backyard one evening, watching children playing among the vegetable beds Abigail had so carefully planted, I reflected on our journey. I once thought I'd become the enemy of an entire neighborhood, I mused to Walter as he joined me with a glass of lemonade. But it turns out sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up for what's right, and others find the courage to do the same. That's how a real community is built. Not through rules and walls, but through people coming together to protect each other's dignity and rights. Walter nodded, watching the children play. The most dangerous weapon against injustice has always been hidden in plain sight, he said, raising his glass in a toast. It's simply the truth, spoken aloud at precisely the right moment. As the sun set over Pine Haven Estates, now truly a community rather than a kingdom, I couldn't help but feel that in fighting for our small piece of land, we had reclaimed something much more valuable: the power of neighbors standing together against intimidation and the simple, profound right to call a place truly home. So, was it worth risking our home? When the sheriff handed me Constance's resignation, letter stained with her courtroom tears, absolutely. The moment 200 neighbors erupted in cheers still gives me chills. But stay vigilant, your HOA's next. So smash that subscribe button. The next tyrant's downfall drops Thursday,